Hello everyone, it's day 13 of our Kent Test Prep series. We are now just a couple of days away from that real Kent Test. So I thought today it would be really useful to focus on the English paper. The whole English paper, we'll just break it down together, go through some examples, and hopefully by the end, you'll just be feeling a little bit more confident that you'll be able to give your best towards this portion of the Kent Test. So let's dive straight in. Firstly, the Kent Test is broken down into two papers, paper 1 and paper 2. Now, paper 1 is called English and Maths, and it is all in one paper. However, they're very much treated as separate tests. You won't do the English and Maths with one timer for all of it. So you'll be given 25 minutes to complete the English with some practice questions as well on top, and also 25 minutes to do the Maths plus some practice question time. So let me write that down. The first half of this test is going to be the English. That's the first thing you'll do on the day you sit your Kent Test. Parents, before I go any further, if you're looking for some tuition this year, then do check us out. We've got some amazing offers and some awesome new stuff coming up with our new website. Watch this space. So breaking down the English paper just that little bit further then, we've obviously got our practice time at the beginning. You get about 5 minutes to do that. It's not included in the main timer of 25 minutes and it's not marked, okay? But the main chunks of this test that you're going to be experiencing are a comprehension part, which is just over half of the test, and also a spelling, punctuation, and grammar section, which we'll break down in a moment. But the key thing I want to say here is it doesn't matter which order you do them in. There's no rules that say you must start at question 1 and work through the test. You can do the test however you like. You've got 25 minutes to complete all of the English questions. So our top tip is you start with those spelling, punctuation, or grammar questions first, because you're going to pick up the most marks quickly there. And then any remaining time you've got, you can spend on the comprehension. Now, if you're not convinced and you're thinking, why? I'll just do the comprehension first and then I can finish with the nice stuff. Well, here's why. There are lots and lots of children who will spend the entire 25 minutes working through that comprehension because it can be quite lengthy, it can be quite challenging. And the problem is the comprehension is only about half of the mark. So their timer goes off and they haven't actually completed half of the paper, despite the spelling, punctuation, and grammar questions being much quicker. So it is more efficient to do them first, get them out of the way. You might complete them in 6 minutes, and then you've got all of that rest of that time to work on the comprehension half. So let's break down the spelling, punctuation, and grammar a bit first then, and we'll come back around to the comprehension later. So in the test, you will be given any 2 of these 3 sections. Now, over the last 6, 7, 8 years, we haven't really seen much of grammar. We see a lot of punctuation and spelling. Grammar hasn't come up in quite a long time, but it's still worth mentioning in this video because you never know. It could be something they introduce. And I'll show you exactly what the questions look like in a minute. Now, in each section, you'll be given 6 questions. So you could have 6 punctuation, then you could have 6 spelling, or you could have 6 spelling and then 6 punctuation. It doesn't matter, but that's all you need to know. 2 sections, 6 questions on each. So let's start on punctuation. A couple of top tips as I go through this. Feel free to pause the video or replay bits if I'm going a little bit too quickly today. But first thing is, if you really want to nail this part of the test, you need to know all your punctuation. So have a little look at my punctuation toolkit, which is what we call it at the top here. Great piece of advice that we give children is to write this toolkit down at the top of their paper. It takes 5-10 seconds once you get used to doing it. And it can be really useful because it brings all of that punctuation to the forefront of your mind right before you do the questions. So really good advice, write this down just at the start of the test in those first 10 seconds, and you've got it there to refer back to and look to if you think maybe you're missing some important piece of punctuation. That's the first thing. Second thing, strategy when actually solving these questions is obviously, firstly, just read it. Just read the sentence, just get a feeling of what this sentence is about. You might even spot the answer straight away, and you can just save some time and do the answer. However, if you've read it through and you're thinking, right, let's tackle this question, the first thing you should do is check the punctuation that's actually already there. So, for example, in this one, we've already got an apostrophe. We have a full stop here. We've got another full stop here. So it could be one of those pieces of punctuation. However, if that's not the answer, if you decide, like in this scenario, that apostrophe is fine, it stands for did not, this full stop is fine, and this full stop here is fine, then you need to be going to the second layer of thinking, which is there any punctuation missing? And I'll be honest with you, that comes up more because it's harder. It's harder to work out where punctuation should go than it is to just spot punctuation that shouldn't be there. So the Kent test tends to do that more often. So in this question, there is some punctuation missing. But remember, if you're absolutely adamant that the sentence is fine, the answer could just be N. N stands for no mistake, okay? But it's unlikely to be N all the time. Sometimes children will have 4 of their answers out of 6 as N, and it's quite unlikely that 4 of the answers are going to be N, so just bear that in mind. You never know, though. 1 or 2 could be. So let's read this question. Rita didn't want to eat. However, Paul and Ian were feeling absolutely famished. Now, you might have noticed, because I emphasized it there, that sometimes just reading the sentence out loud can really help. But, Mr. Stevens, I know we're in a test situation. We can't read it out loud, but you can have that emphasis in your head still as you go. Now, what we're missing here was a comma after however. However, comma. Paul and Ian were feeling absolutely famished. The answer is B. We get to move on. So that's how we do punctuation questions. On to spelling questions. Now, unlike punctuation, where there's only so much punctuation you can learn, spellings is kind of endless. You know, there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of words in the English language, and we can't expect everyone to know all of them. But we can do a few things to help us. Now, firstly, you'll primarily find the national curriculum words are used in the Kent test questions. And you can simply Google that if you want to after this video to find a list of the national curriculum words. It's a few hundred words, but it's a little bit more achievable than saying, hey, go and learn 100,000 words. Another thing you can do to help is if at school or in any of your sessions, perhaps with us or any of your tutors, you've been learning about spelling rules, they're really good things to practice because spelling rules can help you identify when a word doesn't look quite right because it's not fitting a certain rule that you've learned. Or perhaps it's an exception word and you go, I know that this doesn't fit the rule, and that's okay. And then finally, there's just going to be some tricky / uncommon words in here. And they do kind of rely on you just picking up a good vocabulary through reading mainly, or just maybe you do something at school that helps you pick up new words. So, you know, don't be harsh on yourself if there is a word or two you think, oh my, I've never seen this word before. But do try and use all of your prior knowledge to help you identify the mistakes. In terms of answering the questions, my tips are quite simple for this one. Firstly, read the sentence forwards, get a sense of the meaning, the context of this question, because there could be a homophone mistake. And if you're not too sure what homophones are, they are words that sound the same, like your and your, but they have different meanings. And, you know, they're both spelt correctly technically, but one of them would be the incorrect spelling if used incorrectly in a sentence. So when you're reading through the first time, just check for homophones. Don't assume that all of the homophones are correct. My second tip, if you haven't spotted anything, if nothing's jumped out at you, is actually to read the sentence backwards. I'm not going crazy. There's a real reason for this, and that's because when you read the sentence backwards, you're actually forcing your brain to just look at the word because it's not in a sentence anymore. When you read a sentence, your brain just goes whoosh all the way through that sentence because it has meaning. And sometimes you can just miss a mistake. You didn't even realize it was there. Reading backwards, ahead, environment, forest, the, handle, to, it actually forces you to just stop and study each word individually, looking for a mistake. And that might help you find the mistake. So have a little look in this one. Can you spot the mistake? If it's still not jumping out at you, use some deduction, tick off words that you know are correct. I'm happy with that. In fact, I know Explorer is spelled correctly. I know properly is, maybe not too sure about this word. I'm happy with these ones. Oh yeah. So I'm down to 2. And at this point, I might be thinking, oh, environment. I know this is one of my national curriculum, year 5, 6 words. And I know environment is spelled with an N here. So my answer is D. Right, on to grammar, the one I said that isn't seen very often, but you never know, it could come up. Grammar questions are a little bit more simple in how they work. So you are given a sentence, and at some point in the sentence, there's a word missing, and it gives you 5 options to fill that gap. And usually it will play on words where people often get them wrong, like using, like this example right here. Is it who? Is it which? Is it they? Is it that? Is it when? Like which word fits here? Because a lot of people would, when speaking, say the wrong word. But actually, we're looking for grammatically correct sentences. So let's have a little look. When Anne started minding the house, so minding means looking after in this situation. When Anne started minding the house, something belonged to her gran. Notice we've got commas here, so it indicates extra information, a relative clause perhaps. She was creeped out. So read it one more time. When Anne started minding the house, belonged to her gran. She was creeped out. So tip number 1, read all 5 options and read it with the sentence as well. When Anne started minding the house, then belonged to her gran, she was creeped out. Who's belonged to her gran? She was creeped out. Who belonged to her gran? she was creeped out. Which belonged to her gran, she was creeped out. And when Anne started minding the house, they belonged to her gran, she was creeped out. Now, I imagine for a lot of you, some of those answers just wouldn't have sounded good. It would have been nonsense, and you could get rid of them like then. It doesn't make any sense. My second tip is to pay attention to the tense or plurality. Now, sometimes the sentence will be in past tense and it might be missing a verb, and they'll give you the right verb, but they'll put it in the future tense or the present tense. So just be careful of that. And also the plurality. Maybe there's something to do with, maybe there's lots of something or just one of something. And again, that can be a very slight change to the spelling. And finally, it's just all about proper English, okay? It's not about sort of putting on maybe your slang or however you speak around the house with your mates or your family. It's about proper, grammatically correct English, and that's what we've got to do. So let's go for the answer. Hopefully you guys have got it. When Anne started minding the house, which belonged to her gran, she was creeped out. It is a relative clause, and there's my relative pronoun that makes sense. Who would make sense if we were talking about a person, but we're talking about a house here, so we wouldn't say who for a house, we'd say which or that. Okay, and my final little bit of input before I give you some questions to have a go at is just on the comprehension. Now, you guys have been doing comprehension probably for years at school, and it is quite, all in all, very similar to the comprehension you do at school. But there's a few things I can tell you about the Kent test. Firstly, questions are in order. Generally, you might have one or two that break that pattern, but they are pretty much always in order of the text. And what I mean by that is question 1 will be asking you something about the beginning, very beginning of the text. Question 2, the answer or the evidence that you need to support that answer would generally come after where you found question 1. So use that to your advantage in terms of saving a bit of time looking for the answers to questions. My second thing is how the questions actually break down. So I could put a dotted line here after question 9. Sometimes it's question 8, sometimes question 10, but generally after a good chunk of 8 or 9 comprehension questions, that's what I'm going to call these ones, comp questions, you then tend to get 4, 5, 6, maybe if you're lucky, word meaning questions. And why is it worth me saying this? Well, it's worth me saying this because if you're running out of time, you might find it's actually quicker to go and solve the word meaning questions, because sometimes it's just as simple as look at line 12. What does mean? And you might already know what that word means because it might be a word in your vocabulary and you can answer it in 5-10 seconds. Or it might be an unfamiliar word and you can still answer it quite quickly because it tells you which line to look in and it's just one word and you can work out that meaning by reading around. So sometimes these questions are really, really good to go to if you're running out of time, or even just do them first anyway. Some of our students do that. They like to do these first and then they work on the first 8 or 9 questions. Okay. Now, back to the comp questions then. So when you're trying to solve these questions, please look for evidence. There it is, I was looking for on the screen. Please look for evidence. You've got to back up your answer with evidence from the text. It is a reading comprehension test. It's not testing you on anything else. It wants you to find evidence. Now, this is always true. 4 of the answers will not have evidence to support them. 1 of the answers will have evidence to support them. And if you're ever in a situation where you think, hey, loads of these answers are real, they're all in the text, then it might be worth looking at the question again, because sometimes the question's asking you a very specific thing. And although the answers are all things that are true in the text, only one of them is actually answering the question. Okay, so going back and forth between question and evidence is really going to help you nail this section of the test. As always, it's now your turn to have a go. I've put a punctuation, a spelling, and a grammar question on the screen for you to have a go at. Let us know in the comments exactly what answers you got so we can see whether it was a good question, whether it was too easy. Perhaps you could tell us if it was too hard. I don't know. But either way, let us know in the comments. If you like the video,